October 8, 1918. The Argonne Forest, France. A young American lieutenant crouches behind a shattered oak, his hands trembling around a standard-issue flashlight. 40 German soldiers occupy the trench line ahead, their rifles trained on the darkness between them. He's outnumbered 8-1, his units scattered, ammunition nearly gone. The conventional move is retreat. Instead, he clicks the flashlight once, then twice. A pattern nobody taught him, a code the enemy has never seen. Within the beam's narrow corridor, something impossible begins to unfold. The Germans lower their weapons. They stand. They walk toward him with hands raised. What signal could compel trained soldiers to surrender to a lone officer they could easily kill? The Meuse-Argonne offensive grinds through its third week, the largest operation American forces have ever attempted. Over 1 million soldiers push against fortified German positions across a 40-mile front. The Argonne Forest itself becomes a nightmare of barbed wire, machine gun nests, and communication trenches so complex they resemble underground cities. Casualties mount hourly. Officers vanish into the fog and never return. Lieutenant Harold Morrison commands a reconnaissance platoon, 32 men tasked with identifying enemy positions ahead of the main advance. He's 24 years old, a former electrical engineering student from Ohio who enlisted the day after graduation. His superiors notice something unusual about him during training. While other officers memorize textbook tactics, Morrison studies the technical manuals for every piece of equipment issued to infantry units. Signal lamps, field telephones, flare pistols. He dismantles them, learns their mechanics, understands their limitations. The Germans control communication in ways the Americans struggle to match. Their signal corps operates with precision born from years of warfare. They use colored flares to coordinate artillery, Morse lamps to relay commands across no man's land, and runners who navigate the trench systems with practiced efficiency. Breaking through their lines requires more than courage. It demands innovation they won't anticipate. Morrison's platoon receives orders on October 7th. Intelligence reports suggest a German machine gun position 2 kilometers northeast, blocking the advance of an entire regiment. Locate it. Mark it for artillery. Return before dawn. Simple on paper. The forest has other plans. They move out at 2,100 hours under moonless sky. Rain begins within the first kilometer, turning the forest floor into sucking mud that pulls at their boots with each step. Visibility drops to arm's length. The patrol spreads too wide trying to maintain formation. By midnight, Morrison realizes he's lost contact with 2/3 of his men. Hand signals become useless in the darkness. Whispered commands risk enemy detection. He continues forward with the 5 soldiers still within reach, hoping the others will regroup at the rally point. The machine gun nest appears sooner than expected. Through gaps in the underbrush, Morrison spots not one position but 3, arranged in overlapping fields of fire. Worse, an entire infantry section occupies the trenches behind them, at least 40 soldiers by his count. His intelligence was catastrophically wrong. This isn't an outpost. It's a strong point. Protocol demands he withdraw immediately and report. But his scattered platoon lies somewhere between here and American lines, exposed and vulnerable if the Germans advance at dawn. The math becomes brutally clear. He cannot fight his way through. He cannot call for support without radios or runners. And he cannot abandon his men to stumble into this position blind. The flashlight sits in his pack, standard equipment carried more from regulation than purpose. Most officers consider them nearly useless in combat, too weak to illuminate properly, too bright to use without drawing fire. Morrison has studied them differently. During stateside training, he noticed something curious about the German prisoners working at the camp. When American guards used flashlights for evening inspections, the prisoners responded with immediate, almost reflexive obedience. Not from fear. From recognition. Morrison signals his 5 men to hold position. They're too few for an assault, too exposed for retreat. The German trench lies 60 meters ahead, close enough that he can hear voices speaking in low tones, the clink of mess kits, the distinctive sound of rifle bolts being cleaned. Sentries pace the parapet at regular intervals. professional soldiers well equipped, dug in deep. He removes the flashlight and examines it by touch. The U.S. Army TL 122A, issued to every infantry officer since 1917. Cylindrical body, twist switch, angled reflector. Simple technology. But technology the Germans know. Their own forces use similar devices manufactured by Zeiss and Siemens. More importantly, they use them according to doctrine Morrison has pieced together from captured equipment manuals and prisoner interrogations. The German army operates on systematic signals. Everything codified. Everything predictable. What if he could exploit that predictability? Morrison recalls the inspection pattern he witnessed. 3 short flashes followed by a pause. The prisoners had interpreted it as a command to stop and stand at attention. Not because Americans trained them to respond that way, but because their own military had drilled those responses into reflex. German signal doctrine uses flashlights for close-range communication in forward positions where flares or lamps would draw unwanted attention. Officers signal their men during night movements. Sentries confirm identity at checkpoints. The system requires instant recognition and instant obedience. The rain intensifies, creating a curtain of sound that will mask his approach. Morrison hands his rifle to the nearest soldier and begins crawling forward. His men watch, confused but silent. They've learned to trust his judgment even when his plans seem incomprehensible. 40 meters now. He can distinguish individual German soldiers in the trench. They're relaxed, expecting no threat from this sector tonight. Why would they? American forces remain pinned down 3 kilometers west, still fighting through the outer defenses. No patrol could have penetrated this deep. 30 meters. The mud soaks through his uniform, cold against his chest and legs. Each movement requires deliberate slowness. One snap of a twig, one dislodged stone, and rifles will tear him apart before he can even stand. 20 meters. Close enough to see the details. A sergeant checking a watch, 2 soldiers sharing cigarettes, a young private no older than 18 staring into the darkness where Morrison lies invisible. The boy's hand rests on his rifle. One shout would end everything. Morrison rises to one knee behind a fallen log. His thumb finds the flashlight switch. The moment stretches impossibly long. What he's about to attempt has no precedent, no backup, no margin for error. If the Germans interpret his signal as anything other than legitimate command, he's a dead man. If they see him clearly and realize he's American, he's a dead man. If they simply decide to shoot first and ask questions later, he's a dead man. He activates the light. 3 short pulses. Pause. 2 short. Pause. 1 long hold. The pattern mimics German Doctrine 4 Commanding Officer Inspection. Stand ready. Morrison improvises the exact sequence based on fragments of intelligence and educated guesswork. He's betting his life that German soldiers, trained to respond instantly to their own signals, won't question the source in the darkness and confusion of a rainy night. The effect stuns him. The nearest soldiers immediately stop what they're doing. They straighten. They look toward the light source. The sergeant barks a command Morrison doesn't understand, but the tone carries unmistakable authority, the voice of a non-commissioned officer enforcing discipline. Men begin standing up along the trench line. Morrison adjusts his position slightly, keeping his body behind the log while angling the flashlight higher. He sends another sequence. 1 long pulse, 3 short, 1 long. In German doctrine, this signals approach for orders. He's commanding them not just to attention but to movement toward him. It works again. The sergeant gestures sharply and soldiers begin climbing out of the trench. They move with mechanical precision, years of training overriding confusion. They advance toward the light source in formation, weapons lowered to carry position rather than ready stance. They expect to find one of their own officers conducting an unexpected inspection or delivering new orders. Instead, they walk toward an American lieutenant crouching in mud with nothing but a flashlight and desperation. Turning point/revelation. Morrison holds the light steady as the first Germans close to within 10 meters. This is the moment everything falls apart or falls into place. He cannot maintain the deception once they see his American uniform. He cannot fight 40 soldiers alone. His only advantage is psychological. The split second of confusion when they realize what's happening. He stands fully upright and speaks in clear English. "You are surrounded. Throw down your weapons." The lie hangs in the wet air. He's not surrounded. He has 5 soldiers hidden in the forest behind him, armed with rifles that might take down a handful of Germans before being overwhelmed. But the darkness works in his favor now. The flashlight beam has destroyed the Germans' night vision. They can see Morrison clearly in his American uniform, but they cannot see what lies beyond him in the forest. For all they know, an entire company waits in those shadows. The sergeant reaches for his pistol. Morrison triggers another flashlight sequence. Rapid, irregular pulses that simulate chaos, suggesting multiple positions coordinating fire. His 5 men, understanding instantly, begin moving through the undergrowth, creating rustling sounds from different directions. It's pure theater, but theater performed in circumstances where the audience has no script and no time to think. 3 German soldiers throw down their rifles. Then 5 more. The sergeant hesitates, his hands still on his holster, trying to calculate odds that don't exist in the darkness. Morrison takes a gamble and flashes the surrender signal used by both sides. A continuous wave. He's commanding them to give up using their own doctrine. The sergeant's shoulders slump. He unbuckles his pistol belt and drops it. The surrender cascades through the group. 40 German soldiers, well armed and well positioned, raise their hands because a flashlight signal convinced them they faced overwhelming force instead of one desperate officer with a borrowed idea. Morrison's men emerge from the forest, rifles trained on the prisoners. They're as shocked as the Germans. One soldier whispers, "How the hell did you do that?" Morrison doesn't answer immediately. He's already counting heads, checking for weapons, organizing the prisoners into a column. The captured sergeant stares at him with something between respect and disbelief. In broken English he asks, "How many soldiers you have?" Morrison meets his eyes. "Enough." The sergeant nods slowly, understanding he's been beaten by deception rather than force. There's no shame in it from his perspective. He followed protocol, responded to what appeared to be legitimate signals, and made a tactical decision to avoid casualties when surrounded. That the surrounding force consisted of 6 Americans instead of 60 doesn't change the fundamental outcome. He surrendered to superior tactics, and tactics are what win wars. But the night isn't over. Morrison now faces a different problem. He's 6 men with 40 prisoners, 2 kilometers behind enemy lines, with no communication to American forces and no clear path to safety. The Germans are disarmed but not demoralized. If they realize how few captors they actually have, the situation could reverse instantly. He makes another decision that defies conventional wisdom. Instead of trying to hide his numbers, he separates the prisoners into small groups and assigns each of his 5 soldiers to guard 8 Germans. He positions himself in the center, flashlight visible, constantly moving between groups. To the prisoners it looks like he's coordinating a larger force. The truth is simpler. He's maintaining the illusion because the illusion is now his only weapon. The march back begins at 0300 hours. Morrison leads from the front, flashlight signaling occasionally to imaginary units in the forest. His men understand the performance and play their parts. They shout commands into the darkness, respond to replies that never come, maintain discipline that suggests they're part of a much larger operation. Dawn approaches as they near American lines. This becomes the most dangerous phase. Friendly sentries will see 40 German soldiers approaching and open fire before recognizing the situation. Morrison cannot signal ahead. He has no working radio, no flare pistol, and the forest still blocks visual line of sight. He stops the column 100 meters short of the expected perimeter. The sky lightens from black to gray. Bird calls replace the silence of night. Somewhere ahead, American soldiers man their positions, fingers on triggers, waiting for the German attack that intelligence predicted would come at first light. Morrison faces a choice that defines the entire operation's success or failure. He can try to signal his identity from distance and risk triggering a firefight. He can hold position until full daylight and lose the psychological advantage keeping his prisoners compliant. Or he can walk directly into American lines with 40 Germans behind him and trust that his own side won't kill him first. He chooses the third option with one modification. He takes the flashlight and begins sending Morse code toward the American positions. Short and long pulses spelling out AMRANOFFICRWIHPRSNOS. He repeats the message continuously, walking forward with deliberate slowness, the flashlight held high above his head. Rifles track him from concealed positions. He can feel the aim points even if he can't see the soldiers behind them. One nervous trigger finger, one misinterpreted movement, and bullets will end the war for him and likely several of his men and prisoners. A voice shouts from the American line, "Halt and identify." Morrison stops. He shouts back his name, rank, and unit. The response comes after agonizing seconds. "Advance slowly with hands visible." He signals his men. The column moves forward. American soldiers emerge from foxholes and earthworks, rifles ready, expressions shifting from tension to confusion to amazement as they realize what they're seeing. An American lieutenant with 5 soldiers is escorting 40 German prisoners out of the forest like he's herding cattle back from pasture. The American company commander, a Captain Morrison has never met, approaches with his pistol drawn but lowered. "Lieutenant, what in God's name is this?" Morrison hands over the flashlight. "Captured enemy strongpoint 2 kilometers northeast, sir. 40 prisoners. Machine gun nests neutralized. Recommend immediate advance before they're reinforced." The captain stares at the flashlight, then at the exhausted Germans, then back at Morrison. "With 6 men?" "With 6 men and proper signaling, sir." Word spreads through the regiment before Morrison finishes his written report. By noon, battalion command interrogates him about his tactics. By evening, division intelligence includes him in their briefing sessions. The captured German sergeant confirms the story through interpreters. They responded to what they believed were legitimate German signals, realized too late they'd been deceived, and surrendered rather than fight what they assumed was superior force. The machine gun position Morrison neutralized represented a critical choke point in the German defensive line. With it removed, American forces advanced 3 kilometers in the following 48 hours, finally breaking through the Argonne's outer defenses. The regiment suffers fewer casualties than projected because Morrison's captured prisoners provide detailed intelligence about German trench layouts, supply routes, and defensive plans. Recognition comes swiftly. Morrison receives the Distinguished Service Cross for extraordinary heroism. The citation specifically mentions his ingenious use of technical equipment to achieve tactical surprise against superior enemy forces. But the more significant impact ripples through American tactical doctrine. Signal Corps officers begin studying the incident. They interview Morrison, examine his flashlight, reconstruct his patterns. The Army publishes new field manuals that include sections on exploiting enemy communication protocols. Future operations incorporate deception signaling as a legitimate tactic rather than desperate improvisation. The 40 German prisoners are processed through standard POW procedures. Most express no bitterness about their capture. They followed orders, responded to what appeared to be legitimate signals, and made a rational decision given the information available. War isn't about honor, it's about survival and advantage. Morrison understood that better than most. His own men speak about the operation with mixture of pride and bewilderment. They watched their lieutenant accomplish something impossible through pure psychological manipulation and technical knowledge. One soldier later writes home, "He captured 40 Germans with a flashlight. Not a shot fired. Not a man lost. I didn't believe it until I saw them standing there with their hands up, looking just as confused as we were." Morrison returns to combat operations the next day. He leads his platoon through subsequent actions with the same methodical intelligence that characterized the flashlight operation. He survives the war, returns to Ohio, completes his engineering degree, and rarely speaks about his service. When pressed, he describes the capture not as heroism but as applied problem-solving, understanding how systems work and exploiting their predictable responses. The flashlight itself receives no special treatment. It returns to equipment stores, gets reissued to another officer, and eventually disappears into the vast logistical machinery of military supply chains. No museum preserves it. No memorial displays it. The object was never important. The thinking behind its use was everything. War transforms ordinary objects into instruments of survival. A flashlight designed for reading maps becomes a weapon more effective than rifles. Doctrine meant to create order becomes vulnerability when someone recognizes its patterns. Morrison understood something fundamental that October night in the Argonne Forest. The enemy's greatest strength, their discipline, their training, their systematic approach to warfare, could become their greatest weakness in the hands of someone willing to think beyond conventional tactics. 40 German soldiers walked toward an American position because a light pattern triggered responses drilled into them through years of military service. They surrendered because darkness, confusion, and calculated deception convinced them they faced inevitable defeat. Morrison didn't overpower them. He didn't outmaneuver them. He simply spoke their language better than they expected an enemy to speak it, and in that moment of miscommunication, won a victory that no amount of bullets could have achieved. The lesson extends beyond that single night. Innovation in warfare, in any human endeavor, comes from recognizing that rules exist to be understood, adapted, and when necessary, exploited against those who follow them too rigidly. Morrison carried a standard flashlight into the forest. He brought back 40 prisoners and a reminder that ingenuity, applied at the precise moment circumstances demand it, can accomplish what entire battalions cannot.